I used your identity for a loan. My granddaughter bragged at dinner. Her boyfriend laughed. She can't even afford a lawyer. They didn't know who I really was. You know what silence sounds like? It sounds like you're heartbreaking in real time while you're still expected to smile and pass the mashed potatoes. It sounds like betrayal echoing through a dining room where you've hosted every birthday, every holiday, every celebration for 24 years. It sounds like the exact moment you realize the child you raised, the child you sacrificed everything for, sees you as nothing more than an easy mark. Before we go on, like this video, subscribe to Elderly Wise Stories, and comment where you're watching from because this one will remind you that silence is never weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before the storm that changes everything. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Crawford. I'm 68 years old, and for the past 3 years, everyone in my family has treated me like I'm already dead. Not literally dead, mind you, but functionally irrelevant. Past my prime. A sweet old grandmother who bakes cookies, forgets names, and needs help opening pickle jars. They see orthopedic shoes and reading glasses and assume my brain went into retirement along with my official job title. What they don't know is that I never really retired at all. You see, for 37 years, I worked as a federal accountant. Started as a junior clerk right out of college, worked my way up through the bureaucracy one spreadsheet at a time. But for the last 15 years of my career, I specialized in something very specific: financial crimes investigation, identity theft, banking fraud, the kind of white-collar crime that destroys lives quietly, efficiently, and often goes unnoticed until it's too late. I was good at it. Damn good. I could spot a forged signature from across a room. I knew every trick, every loophole, every desperate scheme people use when they think nobody's watching. I put away embezzlers, identity thieves, mortgage fraudsters, and Ponzi scheme operators. I was the one they called when the numbers didn't add up and somebody needed to figure out where the money really went. When I officially retired 3 years ago, they threw me a nice party. Cake from the grocery store, a plaque with my name spelled wrong, and handshakes from colleagues who were already planning to forget I existed. But what they didn't announce at that party, what they couldn't announce, is that I kept my security clearance. I kept my federal banking investigator credentials. And I kept working as a consultant for the Financial Crimes Unit. You can't just walk away from 37 years of expertise. The government knows that. When a case comes across their desk that requires someone who's seen every variation of financial fraud known to mankind, they call me. Quietly. Discreetly. I work from home, reviewing case files, analyzing suspicious transactions, and helping younger agents understand patterns that only come from decades of experience. My family thinks I spend my days watching game shows and complaining about my arthritis. They have no idea that last month I helped uncover a multi-million-dollar cryptocurrency fraud ring. They don't know that 2 weeks ago, my analysis led to the arrest of a mortgage broker who'd been stealing down payments from first-time home buyers. They see a harmless old woman who can barely figure out her smartphone, and they have no clue that I regularly access federal databases and coordinate with FBI field offices across 3 time zones. The irony is suffocating. I spent my entire career protecting people from exactly the kind of crime my own granddaughter was about to commit against me. Sophia. My granddaughter Sophia. 24 years old, college-educated, raised in a comfortable middle-class home where she never wanted for anything. I helped pay for that education. I helped buy her first car. When she was little, she used to call me Nana Maggie and sit on my lap while I balanced my checkbook, asking a million questions about numbers and money and why some people had more than others. Nana Maggie, she'd say, when I grow up, I'm going to be rich so I can take care of you. Children say things like that. Sweet, innocent promises that make your heart swell with love and pride. You never imagine that 20 years later, their definition of taking care of you will involve stealing your identity and laughing about it over Sunday dinner. The signs were there. God help me, the signs were screaming at me for months, and I chose to ignore them because I wanted to believe in the little girl who used to braid my hair and promise to protect me when I got old. I wanted to believe that the young woman who graduated summa cum laude from college wouldn't stoop to the kind of petty fraud I'd been investigating for decades. But I'm a trained investigator, and training runs deeper than hope. It started with small things. Sophia began dressing differently about 6 months ago. Designer handbags that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Shoes that I recognized from window shopping trips where she'd always sighed about being broke. Jewelry that caught the light in ways that department store pieces never do. When I asked about her sudden windfall, she'd laugh it off. "Oh, Nana, I've just been saving up. You know how good I am with money." I didn't know how good she was with money. She was terrible with it. Always had been. In college, she'd call me crying about overdraft fees and credit card bills, and I'd bail her out because I loved her and wanted her to succeed. After graduation, she moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford her own place. She worked part-time at a boutique and complained constantly about not making enough to live the life she wanted. So when she suddenly started flashing expensive accessories and talking about big plans, my investigator instincts kicked in. Not because I suspected her of targeting me specifically, but because I suspected her of doing something stupid that would get her in trouble. I thought maybe she'd gotten involved with the wrong crowd, or fallen for some get-rich-quick scheme, or started spending money she didn't have because she thought her luck had changed. I started watching her social media more carefully. Instagram posts from expensive restaurants. Facebook check-ins at luxury shopping centers. Snapchat videos from her new apartment that she definitely couldn't afford on a boutique clerk's salary. When I asked her parents about it, they just shrugged. "She's young," my daughter said. "Maybe she got a better job and just hasn't told us yet." But I know better than to accept surface explanations when the numbers don't add up. So I did what any responsible investigator would do. I started monitoring my own credit reports more carefully. That's when I found the inquiry. 3 weeks ago, I was reviewing my monthly credit monitoring alert when I saw it, an inquiry from Premier Financial Services for a personal loan in the amount of $85,000. The inquiry was legitimate, meaning someone had actually submitted an application using my social security number, my name, and enough personal information to pass the initial screening. My blood ran cold. Not because I was afraid of identity theft in general, but because I knew exactly who had access to all my personal information. I knew who had been in my house recently, who had seen my mail, who had helped me organize my files when I'd complained about getting my paperwork in order. I knew who had insisted on helping me set up online banking for my convenience and had watched me type in passwords while standing right behind my chair. I wanted to be wrong. God, how desperately I wanted to be wrong. So I did what I'd learned to do in 37 years of investigation. I gathered evidence before jumping to conclusions. I called Premier Financial Services and identified myself as the potential victim of identity theft. I explained that I had not applied for any loans and requested copies of all documentation submitted with the application. They were required by law to provide it, and they did. The application was a masterpiece of careful fraud. My name, my social security number, my address, my phone number, all correct. My employment history, accurately listing my federal government career and my retirement date. My banking information, including account numbers and routing numbers that I'd never given to anyone outside my immediate family. My income, artificially inflated to show consulting fees that weren't entirely fabricated, but were greatly exaggerated. And there, on page 4 of the application, was my signature. Not a perfect forgery, but close enough to pass a casual inspection. I knew exactly where that signature had come from, the birthday check I'd written to Sophia 2 months earlier. $50 for her birthday, signed with the same careful cursive I'd been using for decades. She'd practiced. I could tell from the slight variations in the pen pressure and the way certain letters were just a fraction off from my natural handwriting. She'd traced it, copied it, practiced it until she could reproduce it well enough to fool a loan officer who had no reason to suspect fraud. The most damning piece of evidence was the income verification. The application claimed that I was earning $6,000 per month as a financial consultant, which wasn't entirely untrue. I do earn consulting fees from my federal work, but those fees are classified, and the only way anyone could know about them would be if they'd been snooping through my personal files. Files that I'd asked Sophia to help me organize just 3 months ago. I sat in my kitchen, staring at those documents, feeling something I'd never experienced in 37 years of investigating financial crimes, the gut-wrenching realization that the perpetrator was someone I loved more than my own life. But I'm a professional. I don't let emotions compromise investigations, even when those emotions are tearing me apart from the inside. So I did what I always do. I documented everything, I secured the evidence, and I started building a case. I contacted my former colleagues at the Financial Crimes Unit and reported the identity theft through official channels. I provided them with all the documentation, explained the family connection, and requested that they treat it as a federal banking fraud case. They agreed to investigate, but they also warned me about the emotional toll of prosecuting a family member. Margaret, my former supervisor, said over the phone, "We've seen this before. Family fraud cases are the hardest ones to prosecute because the victims often change their minds at the last minute. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" I was sure. I had to be sure. Because if I let Sophia get away with this, she wouldn't stop here. Identity thieves never stop after one successful theft. They escalate. They get bolder. They target new victims. And eventually, they get caught anyway, but by then the damage is so much worse. Plus, I knew something my family didn't know. This wasn't Sophia's first victim. My federal access allowed me to run a broader investigation, and what I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 8 months, there had been 3 other suspicious loan applications using personal information that could only have come from someone with access to family records and documents. My daughter, Sophia's mother, had been targeted for a $15,000 credit card that she didn't know existed. The card had been used for cash advances and luxury purchases before being maxed out and abandoned. My son-in-law had been listed as a cosigner on a car loan for a vehicle that was immediately sold for cash. Even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been targeted after Sophia had offered to help her with grocery shopping and had gained access to her purse and personal information. This wasn't a desperate one-time mistake by a young woman who'd gotten in over her head. This was a systematic pattern of fraud targeting vulnerable people who trusted her. And the most vulnerable target of all, the one with the best credit and the most assets, was me. I had 2 choices. I could confront her privately, hope she'd confess and make restitution, and pray that she'd never do it again. Or I could treat her like any other criminal and let the justice system handle it. Every instinct I had as a grandmother screamed for option 1. Every instinct I had as a federal investigator demanded option 2. The decision was made for me when Sophia called and invited herself to Sunday dinner. "I have some exciting news to share with the family," she said, her voice bright with artificial enthusiasm. "I want everyone to be there." I knew what her exciting news would be. The loan had been approved. $85,000, deposited into an account that she'd opened using my identity, but with her contact information. In her mind, she'd pulled off the perfect crime against a helpless old woman who would never figure out what happened. She had no idea that I'd been tracking every step of her scheme for 3 weeks. She had no idea that federal agents were already building a case file with her name on it. She had no idea that the harmless old grandmother she'd been laughing about was the same Margaret Crawford who'd put away over 200 financial criminals during her federal career. She was about to find out. Sunday dinner at my house has been a family tradition for as long as I can remember. Every week, my dining room fills with the people I love most in the world. My daughter Linda and her husband Robert, my son Michael and his wife Sarah, and usually whichever grandchildren aren't too busy with their social lives to spend time with their boring old grandmother. This particular Sunday, everyone came. Sophia made sure of that by insisting it was important and promising big news. She even brought her boyfriend Derek, a 26-year-old wannabe entrepreneur who'd been living off his parents' money while pursuing various business opportunities that never seemed to materialize into actual income. I spent all morning cooking, just like I always do. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, fresh bread, green bean casserole, apple pie for dessert. The same meal I've been making for Sunday dinners for 25 years. The same meal I made when Sophia was little and would help me set the table, carefully placing each fork and napkin exactly where they belonged. As I chopped vegetables and stirred gravy, I thought about all the conversations that had happened around my dining room table. Birthday celebrations, graduation announcements, holiday gatherings, difficult discussions about divorce and job loss and health scares. This table had been the center of our family's life for decades. It was about to become the scene of the most devastating betrayal I'd ever experienced. They arrived at 2 o'clock, just like always. Sophia pulled up in a brand new Mercedes convertible that definitely wasn't in her price range 3 months ago. She was wearing a designer dress that I recognized from a magazine, carrying a handbag that cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and sporting diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved her head. Derek climbed out of the passenger seat wearing clothes that probably cost more than the car he'd been driving last month. Gold watch, Italian leather shoes, haircut that screamed expensive salon. They looked like a young power couple headed to a charity gala, not a boutique clerk and unemployed dreamer coming to Sunday dinner with Grandma. Nana Maggie. Sophia squealed, throwing her arms around me in a hug that felt rehearsed and hollow. You look beautiful. I love what you've done with your hair. I hadn't done anything with my hair. It was the same style I'd worn to every Sunday dinner for the past 5 years. But I smiled and hugged her back because that's what grandmothers do, even when they know their granddaughter is lying to their face about everything from hair compliments to loan applications. That's quite a car, sweetheart, I said, gesturing toward the Mercedes. Business must be going well at the boutique. She laughed, the same bright, artificial laugh she'd been using for months. Oh, Nana, I have so much to tell you. But let's wait until everyone gets here. I want to share my news with the whole family at once. Derek shook my hand with the overly firm grip of someone trying to project confidence he didn't actually feel. Mrs. Crawford, thank you so much for having me. Sophia talks about these family dinners all the time. Of course, Derek. Any friend of Sophia's is welcome here. But as I said it, I was mentally reviewing everything I knew about Derek's financial situation. Unemployed for 8 months. Living with his parents. Credit score in the low 500s due to unpaid student loans and credit card debt. No legitimate source of income that could explain his sudden transformation into a walking advertisement for luxury brands. Which meant he was either complicit in Sophia's schemes, or he was her next victim. The rest of the family arrived within minutes of each other, just like they always did. Linda and Robert brought wine and flowers, talking about their latest home renovation project. Michael and Sarah came with homemade cookies and stories about their teenage son's basketball team. Normal family conversation about normal family things. Everyone complimented Sophia on her appearance and asked about the new car. She deflected their questions with promises to explain everything during dinner, building suspense like she was planning some wonderful surprise instead of preparing to confess to federal banking fraud. We gathered around the dining room table, the same table where I'd taught Sophia to count when she was 4 years old. The same table where she'd done homework while I helped with math problems and science projects. The same table where she'd cried about her first broken heart and celebrated her college acceptance letter. I served the meal I'd been making for decades, listening to familiar family chatter about work and weather and weekend plans. Normal conversation from normal people who had no idea they were about to witness the destruction of everything we'd built together as a family. Sophia waited until dessert was served before making her announcement. She stood up, raising her wine glass like she was proposing a toast, her face glowing with pride and excitement. I have incredible news to share with all of you, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed she'd outsmarted the world. I know you've all been wondering about some of the changes in my life lately, and I'm finally ready to tell you what's been happening. She paused for dramatic effect, soaking in the attention and anticipation from our family members who genuinely loved her and wanted to celebrate whatever success she was about to announce. I've been approved for a business loan, she said, her smile widening as she delivered what she thought was wonderful news. $85,000 to start my own fashion boutique. I'm going to be my own boss, creating the kind of shopping experience I've always dreamed about. The table erupted in congratulations and excited questions. Linda started crying happy tears, talking about how proud she was of her daughter's entrepreneurial spirit. Robert raised his glass and proposed a toast to Sophia's success. Michael and Sarah started asking about location and business plans and whether she needed any help with the startup process. It was Derek who delivered the line that changed everything. The best part, he said, laughing as he put his arm around Sophia's shoulders, is that she got the loan using her grandmother's credit. Brilliant, right? The bank didn't even question it. The table went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people processing good news, but the shocked silence of people trying to understand what they'd just heard. What do you mean, using her grandmother's credit? Linda asked, her voice careful and confused. Sophia's confidence faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. Oh, it's not a big deal, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I just used Nana's information on the application. She has such good credit, and she's not using it for anything anyway. It's basically like a family loan, right, Nana? She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to smile and nod and give my blessing to what she'd just described as a family loan, but what I knew was federal banking fraud punishable by up to 30 years in prison. I used your identity for a loan, she continued, her voice getting stronger as she convinced herself that this was perfectly acceptable. The approval came through last week, and now I can finally start the business I've been dreaming about my whole life. Derek laughed, apparently thinking this was all perfectly normal and legal. She was worried you might be upset about it, but I told her you'd understand. I mean, what can you do about it anyway? It's not like you can afford a lawyer or anything. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the pieces clicking together in my family members' minds as they realized what had just been confessed to. I could see the horror growing on Linda's face as she understood that her daughter had just admitted to identity theft. I could see Robert and Michael exchanging glances that said they weren't sure if they'd heard correctly. But what I felt most keenly was the devastating confirmation that the granddaughter I'd loved and protected and sacrificed for had not only stolen from me, but genuinely believed I was too weak, too old, and too poor to do anything about it. Sophia, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest, do you understand what you just told us? She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. Nana, don't make such a big deal about it. It's not like I'm hurting you or anything. You're not even using your credit, and this loan is going to help me build a successful business. Think of it as an investment in my future. An investment, I repeated slowly. Using my name, my social security number, my credit history, and forged documents without my knowledge or consent. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds bad, she said, laughing nervously. But it's not really that serious. It's just family helping family, right? Derek nodded along enthusiastically. Exactly. It's not like she's stealing from strangers or anything. You're her grandmother. This is what families do for each other. That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger, exactly, but a cold, crystal clear understanding that the two people sitting across from me had no comprehension of what they'd done, no respect for the law, and no concern for the consequences of their actions. They genuinely believed that stealing my identity was acceptable because I was old and powerless and wouldn't fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I excused myself from the table, telling everyone I needed to get something from my bedroom. My family assumed I was upset and needed a moment to compose myself. Sophia and Derek assumed I was accepting defeat and going to sulk in private while they celebrated their successful scam. None of them guessed that I was going to get my federal investigator credentials and my secure phone. I walked calmly to my bedroom, closed the door, and sent a text message to Agent Patricia Novak, my former colleague who is now handling my case. Subject: confirmed identity theft with multiple witnesses present. Request immediate assistance at 424 Hamilton Street. Family dinner in progress. Evidence is being recorded. Her response came back within 30 seconds. Units dispatched. ETA 12 minutes. Document everything. I returned to the dining room with my credentials in my pocket and my phone set to record audio. My family was trying to have an awkward conversation about whether what Sophia had done was actually legal, while Sophia and Derek were becoming increasingly defensive about their business strategy. "Nana," Sophia said when she saw me sit back down, "I hope you're not going to be difficult about this. I really need this loan to work out, and I can't have you causing problems with the bank." "Yeah," Derek added, "it's not like you understand business anyway. This is a smart move that's going to benefit everyone in the long run." I looked across the table at these two young people who had just committed federal crimes while eating my pot roast, and I felt something I'd never experienced in 37 years of law enforcement. Personal satisfaction at the prospect of bringing criminals to justice. "Sophia," I said calmly, "I need you to understand something about the crime you just confessed to committing." "Crime?" She laughed. "Nana, you're being ridiculous. This isn't a crime. This is family business." Section 1344 of the Federal Banking Fraud Statute, I continued, ignoring her interruption, defines bank fraud as knowingly executing a scheme to defraud a financial institution or obtaining money from a financial institution by false or fraudulent pretenses. Maximum penalty is 30 years in federal prison and fines up to $1 million. The laughter died on her lips. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you committed federal banking fraud when you submitted a loan application using my identity without my knowledge or consent. I'm talking about the fact that you forged my signature on financial documents. I'm talking about the fact that you're going to federal prison." Derek's face went pale. "She's just trying to scare us. Old people don't know anything about the law." "You're right," I said, reaching into my pocket. "Most old people don't know much about federal banking fraud statutes. But I'm not most old people." I placed my credentials on the table. Federal Financial Crimes Investigator, Criminal Investigation Division, U.S. Department of Treasury. Active consultant status. Security clearance level, top secret. The silence was absolute. "For 37 years," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word, "I investigated financial crimes for the federal government. For the last 15 years of my career, I specialized in identity theft and banking fraud. I've put away over 200 criminals who committed exactly the same crime you just confessed to." Sophia's face went white. "That's impossible. You're retired. You bake cookies and watch TV." "I am officially retired from full-time federal service," I said. "But I maintain my investigator credentials and security clearance as a consultant. 3 weeks ago, when I discovered that someone had submitted a fraudulent loan application using my identity, I reported it to the Financial Crimes Unit. They've been building a case ever since." I pulled out my phone and showed them the text message thread with Agent Novak. "I've been documenting your confession for the past 10 minutes. Every word you've said has been recorded and will be submitted as evidence in your federal banking fraud trial." Derek tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't turn in your own granddaughter." "I've turned in murderers, embezzlers, Ponzi scheme operators, and mortgage fraudsters," I replied. "Family relationship doesn't grant immunity from federal prosecution." That's when Sophia started to panic. "Nana, please, I didn't know you were still working for the government. I never would have done this if I'd known you were an investigator. Can't we just call the bank and cancel the loan?" "The loan was funded 3 days ago," I said. $85,000 was deposited into an account you opened using my identity. The crime was completed the moment you received that money. But I haven't spent it yet, she protested. I can give it back. You've spent over $12,000 in the past 3 days, I corrected her, pulling up the transaction records I'd obtained through my federal access. Mercedes down payment, shopping sprees, jewelry, restaurant bills. Should I continue? The sound of sirens in the distance cut through her protests. What is that? Linda asked, her voice shaking. That, I said, standing up from the table, is the FBI. I walked to the front window and looked out at the street. 3 black SUVs with federal plates were pulling into my driveway. Agents in bulletproof vests were getting out, adjusting their equipment, preparing to make arrests. You called the FBI? Sophia screamed. On your own granddaughter? I turned back to face her, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, I let my real emotions show. The pain, the betrayal, the devastating heartbreak of realizing that the child I'd loved unconditionally had seen me as nothing more than an easy target. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking just slightly. You called the FBI when you decided to commit federal crimes using my identity. The front door opened, and Agent Novak walked in with 5 other federal agents. She flashed her badge and looked around the dining room, taking in the scene of a family dinner interrupted by the reality of federal law enforcement. Margaret, she said with professional courtesy, we're here to execute the arrest warrants. I nodded and stepped aside as the agents moved efficiently through my dining room. Sophia Marie Harrison and Derek James Mitchell, you're under arrest for federal banking fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Sophia started crying and screaming as they handcuffed her. Nana, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please don't let them arrest me. Derek tried to run. He actually tried to run from federal agents in my dining room, knocking over chairs and tripping over the coffee table in a pathetic attempt to escape through the back door. He was tackled and handcuffed before he made it out of the kitchen. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Novak continued, reading them their Miranda rights while my family watched in shock and horror. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they were being led away, Sophia turned back to me with tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to me? I'm your granddaughter. You're supposed to protect me. I looked at this young woman who had stolen my identity, mocked my powerlessness, and laughed about my inability to fight back, and I felt something I'd never expected to feel toward a family member, complete emotional detachment. I did protect you, I said quietly. For 24 years, I protected you, supported you, and loved you unconditionally. But I can't protect you from the consequences of federal crimes. But you're ruining my life, she sobbed as the agents guided her toward the door. No, sweetheart, I replied, my voice steady and final. You did that when you decided to steal mine. After they were gone, after the federal agents had finished their paperwork and left with their evidence and their prisoners, my family sat in stunned silence around my dining room table. The remnants of our Sunday dinner were still scattered across the surface, half-eaten apple pie, cold coffee, wine glasses that would never be raised in celebration of Sophia's success again. Linda was crying quietly, overwhelmed by the realization that her daughter was facing decades in federal prison. Robert was staring at his hands, probably wondering how he'd failed to recognize the signs of his daughter's criminal behavior. Michael and Sarah were whispering to each other, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Margaret, Linda finally said, her voice barely audible, did you really have to call the FBI? Couldn't we have handled this as a family? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised to believe in right and wrong, and I realized that she still didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened. Linda, I said gently, Sophia didn't just take money from me. She committed identity theft against you, too. And Robert. And Mrs. Patterson next door. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern of systematic fraud targeting vulnerable people who trusted her. Robert's head snapped up. What do you mean, identity theft against us? I pulled out the case file that Agent Novak had left with me and showed them the evidence. Credit cards opened in Linda's name. Auto loans with Robert as an unauthorized cosigner. Cash advances and luxury purchases made using financial information that Sophia had gathered from helping them with their taxes and bill paying. Over the past 8 months, I explained, she's stolen approximately $40,000 from various family members and neighbors. The $85,000 loan in my name was just the biggest score. The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence we'd experienced earlier. This was the silence of people realizing that someone they loved had been systematically victimizing them for months, and they'd been too trusting to notice. She's been stealing from all of us, Michael said slowly. And we never suspected anything because we loved her and wanted to believe she was finally getting her life together. That's exactly what she was counting on, I confirmed. Family members make the best victims for identity theft because they have access to personal information, and they're the least likely to press charges when they discover the fraud. But you press charges, Sarah pointed out. Against your own granddaughter. I stood up and started clearing the dinner dishes, needing something to do with my hands while I explained the most difficult decision I'd ever made in my life. Yes, I pressed charges. Because I spent 37 years learning that criminals don't stop until they're stopped. Because I knew that if I didn't hold her accountable, she'd just find new victims and more sophisticated schemes. Because I understood that the best thing I could do for Sophia, as someone who loves her, was to make sure she faced consequences before her crimes escalated to the point where she'd spend the rest of her life in prison. I paused, holding a stack of plates that we'd eaten from like a normal family just hours earlier. And because I realized that the granddaughter I thought I knew, the one who used to help me bake cookies and promised to take care of me when I got old, doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never existed. Maybe I just loved the idea of her so much that I ignored who she really was. The federal investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Sophia's crimes. Bank records, credit applications, forged documents, false identities. She'd been running identity theft schemes for over a year, targeting not just family members, but also customers from the boutique where she worked, elderly neighbors, and college classmates whose personal information she'd kept from their shared dorm years. The Mercedes, the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the luxury apartment, all of it had been purchased with stolen money. The business loan in my name was supposed to be her exit strategy, a large enough score to pay off her debts and disappear before anyone discovered what she'd been doing. Derek turned out to be more than just a complicit boyfriend. He was the one who'd taught her how to forge signatures and falsify documents. He was the one who'd helped her open accounts in other people's names and taught her how to avoid detection by spreading her crimes across multiple banks and credit unions. Together, they'd stolen over $300,000 from 27 different victims. The sentencing hearing was held 6 months later in federal court. Sophia pled guilty to multiple counts of identity theft, banking fraud, and conspiracy. Derek pled guilty to the same charges. They were hoping for leniency, and their lawyers painted them as young people who'd made mistakes and deserved a second chance. I was asked to provide a victim impact statement. The prosecutor explained that my words could influence the judge's sentencing decision, and that many family members in similar situations chose to ask for mercy. I spent weeks thinking about what I wanted to say. I thought about the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask questions about numbers. I thought about the teenager who'd cried in my kitchen about boys and school and her uncertain future. I thought about the young woman who'd graduated from college and hugged me tight while promising to make me proud. But then I thought about all the other victims. Mrs. Patterson, my 83-year-old neighbor, who discovered that her credit cards had been maxed out and her savings account had been drained while she was recovering from hip surgery. My daughter Linda, who'd been denied a mortgage because of the false credit accounts that had destroyed her credit rating. Young families who'd lost their down payments to fraudulent schemes and couldn't afford to buy homes for their children. On the day of sentencing, I stood in federal court and looked across the room at Sophia, who was wearing a simple dress and crying softly as she waited to learn her fate. "Your Honor," I began, "I am here not just as a victim of financial fraud, but as a former federal investigator who spent 37 years putting criminals in prison for these exact crimes. I understand the law, I understand the consequences, and I understand the impact these crimes have on victims and communities." I paused, looking directly at Sophia for the first time since her arrest. "I also understand that the young woman sitting in this courtroom is my granddaughter, whom I love despite everything she's done. But love doesn't excuse federal crimes. Love doesn't undo the damage she's caused to dozens of innocent people. And love doesn't guarantee that she won't commit these crimes again if she believes she can get away with them." Sophia's lawyer had advised her not to look at me during my statement, but she couldn't help herself. When our eyes met, I saw something I'd been hoping to see for months: genuine remorse. Not self-pity, not anger at being caught, but actual understanding of the pain she'd caused. "I request that this court sentence both defendants to the maximum penalty allowed by law," I continued. "Not because I want revenge, but because I want justice for all the victims, and because I want Sophia to understand that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed against people who love you." The judge sentenced Sophia to 15 years in federal prison. Derek received 18 years because of his role in teaching and coordinating the schemes. Both were ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, which would likely take them decades to complete even after their release. As the bailiffs led them away, Sophia turned back one last time. "I'm sorry, Nana," she said, her voice breaking. "I really am sorry." I nodded, because I believed her. But I also knew that sorry wasn't enough to undo the damage, and it wasn't enough to guarantee that she wouldn't make the same choices again if given the opportunity. That was 2 years ago. Sophia is currently serving her sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. She's been writing me letters, long, thoughtful letters where she talks about the financial literacy classes she's taking, the victim impact counseling she's receiving, and the gradual understanding she's developing about the real harm her crimes caused. I haven't written back yet. I'm not sure I ever will. People ask me if I regret my decision to prosecute her. They ask if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I think family should protect family no matter what, if I believe forgiveness is more important than justice. My answer is always the same: I didn't raise her for this. I didn't sacrifice and save and love and support her so she could grow up to prey on vulnerable people who trusted her. The granddaughter I thought I was protecting never existed, and the woman who committed those crimes needed to face consequences. But I'll tell you what I do regret. I regret not recognizing the signs earlier. I regret not having the difficult conversations about ethics and consequences when she was younger. I regret not understanding that privilege and opportunity don't automatically create character, and that love without boundaries can enable the exact behavior you're trying to prevent. Most of all, I regret that I had to choose between protecting my granddaughter and protecting her victims, because in a just world, those should have been the same thing. Being quiet doesn't mean being blind. I spent years teaching others to protect their identity. I just never thought I'd need protection from my own blood. If you believe silence can be powerful, comment, "Justice speaks quietly." And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories that prove one thing: truth always finds its voice, even when that voice belongs to a 68-year-old grandmother who refuses to be anyone's easy target. The truth is, I'm still a federal investigator. I'm still putting criminals in prison. I'm still fighting financial fraud and protecting innocent victims from people who think they're too smart to get caught. I just never imagined that one of those criminals would be someone I taught to count at this very same dining room table. But that's the thing about justice. It doesn't care about your relationships, your emotions, or your excuses. It only cares about right and wrong. And when someone you love chooses wrong, love means holding them accountable, even when it breaks your heart. Especially when it breaks your heart.